UBC's chapter of Psychi acknowledges that it operates on UBC's infrastructure, which is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Please appreciate the meaning behind the statement as we move forward with the Labyrinth podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Labyrinth podcast. Thousands of students, less than 100 labs. How do you find your way around a maze of research opportunities? We are UBC Psychi, and this podcast serves as a one way route to everything you need to hear about UBC psychology labs. We invite principal investigators and lab members to encourage, educate, and inform students about research opportunities in psychology. My name is Ria, and I'm the Vice President Events at Psychi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. Today, on the Labyrinth podcast, we have the Principal Investigator from the Psychosocial Flourishing and Health Lab, Dr. Eric Kim, who also happens to be a Psychi member in the past. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Kim.
Hello, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you. I'm very excited.
Likewise, and there's so many things that I want to discuss about the amazing work that you do. But before we get into the nitty gritty, I'd like us to start with just a short intro to your lab. So if you could tell us about the work that you do in a sentence or two, that would be great.
Sure. We look at how different dimensions of psychological well-being, such as sense of purpose in life, optimism, and hope, and how these kinds of factors might go on to influence our health behaviors and our health outcomes. And we're particularly interested in the older adult population.
Oh, wow. And all of these topics sound so interesting. I mean, purpose in life, I feel like that's just a topic that's not been I mean, you hear about it that you need to find this purpose in life, but I feel like we're all still a little lost our lives, and we still don't know exactly what it is to find that purpose. And
Yeah.
you mentioned that there is a focus on older adults. I'm curious to know if there's a particular reason for the emphasis on this population.
Sure, there's a number of reasons why, but I think if there was a pie chart, the largest part of the pie would be my grandfather. He was
Mm,
he's a hero in our family, and he ran an orphanage for several decades in South Korea. And
wow.
yeah, he was someone I always looked up to, and he also partially sparked my career in psychology because what I saw
Mhm.
was when he was doing this, he was yeah, had a great purpose in life and was um, getting out of bed every morning and running around, literally running around, taking care of the needs of children. But after their mandatory retirement age, I really saw him kind of declining, and that process really put a seed in my mind, and that's something that I later tried to investigate empirically.
And that is so inspiring, and it's honestly such a heartwarming story. And like, I always imagine like, of course, like my life purpose also has to be something where you wake up every day and you want to go out there and to be able to support individuals. So,
Yes.
and I know that the work that you do within your lab is not just knowing about why something like this happens, like why do you see that decline? It's also about then taking this knowledge and applying it outside of the lab in terms of
Yes.
designing interventions and helping inform policies. Could you share some examples of how your lab has been able to do this?
Sure. Yes. Yep. I'll share some examples, but before saying that, I wanted to talk a little bit about because you were bringing up the topic of purpose, and I just wanted to share a really interesting aspect that I think would be of interest to psychology students. Very recently, a lot of empirical and theoretical work has been converging,
Mm-hmm.
and there were two review papers that came out very near each other, and they both came with similar conclusions that meaning in life is the
Mm-hmm.
overarching construct, and in order to have a meaningful life, there are three different core pillars that are needed.
Mm-hmm.
One is having a sense of purpose, that sense of direction, overarching goal to go towards. Another is having a sense of coherence in life. Does my own life make sense? And does the world around me make sense? And is there a life philosophy that can help me make sense of these things? And finally, a sense of significance. Do I think what I'm doing is significant, and does the world think what I'm doing is significant? So these are the three different pillars underneath having a meaningful life. So yep. So based on that, yeah, that's something actually I try to optimize our lab for. I try to help our lab members feel all of these three things, and translational work is one of the ways in which we do these things. So one example is we're doing work with um, United Way World Headquarters, and this work is
Wow.
being led by our grad student Julia Nakamura, and she's been working with them for this past year. And one of the projects we've been working on is actually calling many branches throughout North America and assessing what the needs are, and the most urgent needs are of older adults, and how that's been changing over time during COVID. And we've also been
Mm.
developing guidelines for different projects that people can just kind of use immediately too, if they want to help create projects. So that's something that we're doing. Another type of translational project we're doing is we're working with older adult advocacy group, AARP in the US, as well as a health insurance company, and we've been piloting these interventions that try to improve different dimensions of psychological well-being, and we're looking at how it influences different health outcomes as well as healthcare costs. So those are two examples, and we do a lot of other things too, but those are two.
Wow. That sounds amazing. And a lot of, I see that the work that you're doing has an emphasis on the social environment and finding, the connection between psychosocial well-being and then physical health. And you mentioned how like one of the studies that you're focusing on is evaluating the effect of COVID. Could you elaborate more on how do you think COVID has made an impact, especially on older adults, because they are the ones who are really isolated during this time?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of awareness, especially lately. So the literature has been there for a while, but public awareness has been more recent around
Yeah.
how important social connections are. So I think that's extremely important, and it's been highlighting that fact. And in this time of COVID, um, it's interesting actually. Older adults are faring better generally in this time, whereas it's actually the younger folk who are more stressed out during this time as well. So that was interesting and a bit counterintuitive for some people. But after the data are coming out retrospectively, older adults have lived through many types of different
Mhm.
difficult times, and they've built up coping mechanisms. Whereas for young folk, we lived relatively without these kinds of world traumas or things. So we're faring a bit worse. However, um, it's really exciting because there's more public awareness and national initiatives such as a chief loneliness officer in the UK as well as Japan. And there's also all kinds of programs that are being deployed for older adults by nonprofits and um, uh, governments as well as corporations too.
And it is definitely like counterintuitive to think that they are the ones who because they were the ones who was isolated, especially in the beginning, to think that young adults are the ones that are faring worse. But you know what? I actually read about this on Facebook recently. Like, I saw a link to an article that said that how social isolation is really increasing among the younger adults. And when I think about it, I feel like in the start they say with COVID, because we had social media, we were able to connect with each other more, so we're still doing okay. But as and when that months pass, I think this isolation still to grow and grow. And even social media didn't give the same benefits anymore. Like, people were not okay with just connecting online. And for
Yeah,
my age group, like as you said, we have no experience dealing with this, and it feels like it's come so soon in our
yeah.
lifetime that it's just like a lot of students are just coping with the fact that during their degree you've had like such a monumental change.
Yes, agreed. Yes, yep. So I hope this is a time when we get to really rethink how we socially connect with people, because especially with people who kind of over relied on social media as forms of connection, we're finding how
Mm.
brittle that type of social connection is, and then it'll help us reinvent and maybe think about it in a new way.
Yeah. And so some of the projects that you mentioned sounds so interesting. And is your lab going to be hiring anytime soon for these projects?
Yeah, definitely. Yep, we're actually actively recruiting RAs right now.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yes, we put out a call, and it was yeah. So we've had over 200 applicants so far, and it's yeah. People are UPC students are amazing. We're just reviewing the CVs, and then there's a three-round interview, and we're selecting people. So if people want to apply, right now is the time to do so, and we're gonna continue, I think, taking in people for the next 2 weeks. So if you want to apply, yeah, please do so.
Wow. over 203 round interviews. I have to ask then, what is the
Yes.
sort of screening process that you've had in mind? Because I can imagine, it would be otherwise really tough to narrow down research assistants from 200 plus applications.
Sure, yeah. Some of the things that we think about is, especially if someone's younger, like a first or second year, it's
Mm-hmm.
totally okay to not have lots of research experience at all. But if someone's a bit more advanced, like they're third, fourth, or recently graduated, we would like for them to have either direct psychology research experience or highly relevant experience. Maybe not even in the psychology lab, but maybe another lab, or even an internship experience that's transferable skills. Other factors that we really think about is, are they a team player? But at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, are they able to bring things across the finish line?
Yeah.
Uh, Another factor we think about is detail orientedness too. So um, yeah, we really believe highly in this because it's really important to do science really well and be detail oriented. And I want to make a distinction there. At the idea generation phase, it's totally okay to make mistakes and stumble and iterate, but towards the when we're collecting data and towards the end, we need to be really detail oriented. So that's something we look out for.
Yeah.
And um, yeah, those are some of the key factors we look for.
And I think that's as first year students, so even we will be so happy, I think, to hear that you don't need prior research experience, because one of the reasons why students tend to get rejected is they don't have research experience, and then it's like a downward spiral sort of a way. Like if
Yep.
you have to start somewhere, and if you don't, if there every lab says that you need to have prior research experience, and how is it going to work out? So I'm sure this is
Yeah.
like a huge relief to our Paris listeners. Also, the
Yes.
fact that you said that it's okay to have experience through an internship, like those transferable skills are the ones that matter. No wonder
Yeah.
you have 200 plus applications.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean. I remember my first time trying to get my first lab experience. It was so hard, and I remember that. So yeah, the thing that we look for is, um, yeah, has someone done something really interesting and exceptional where they displayed that ability to concentrate on something for a long time. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, of course we'll look for people who do lab experience, but there's another pipeline of people who have done something totally different, and then they're like, I want to take those concentration skills and ability to yeah, do things over a long period of time and apply to psychology, and we're very open to those kind of people too. So actually, in our lab, we also have like business school students too, who didn't
Wow.
have direct psychology experience, but they had a lot of relevant experience in other arenas, and we're very interested in. Right now, we're also probably going to take someone who's a computer science student actually, who doesn't have psychology research experience, but they have a lot of other relevant experience too. And we actually want to have a really diverse lab, not only in terms of backgrounds and research experience, but also all the other identity factors too.
I think that's so interesting, and I honestly find it so relatable because I'm in my fourth year right now. I'm going to be graduating soon, and I fell in love with research only after my third year when I got involved with applied opportunities. So, like
Yes.
maybe design research, or like like designing an intervention, or like working on a career assessment test. Like those are the things that I've started realizing that, oh, research can be applied outside the lab too. And I think that's where I honestly didn't even know that this is a possibility before. It
Yeah.
felt like it was too late now, but I heard that you said that you do accept recent graduates. So if
Yes.
students are interested in coming to your lab after they're graduated, then there is
Yes.
an opening.
Definitely. Totally. Yep. Some of the people in the last round of interviews right now are those kinds of people. And yeah, totally.
That is great news to hear. And some of these projects are, I mean, as you mentioned, currently you mentioned some of the current projects. I'm wondering, the students then who do get in, are they going to be focusing on same projects, or are you looking to hire for some of your future projects?
Yep. So we're hiring. Um, Basically, our philosophy is if we find someone who's great, we're gonna try to get them on the bus, and the bus is our lab. So and there's always work to do, whether it's more on the basic research side or even towards the more translational side on the other end of the spectrum. So we're continuously doing these projects, and we just have so much work right now that we're looking for those really hardworking people. Another additional factor too is that we actually ask people to read books constantly too. So
Oh.
yeah, with our grad and postdocs, they actually have to read a book every 2 weeks, whereas with our RAs, we have to read a book every month, and it's on all kinds of topics, whether it's from leadership, how to be more creative, how to be an expert, how to learn faster. So I personally have I think about read 700 books in this area of like kind of like skill refinement and things. And then we have a Lab Audible account, and we get like 2 tokens every month. So we have about 100-ish books, and we're continuously adding ones that I think people are needing. So we actually have every RA also meets with me too in
Mm.
individual meetings, and I think that's a little different. And they also meet, so that happens about once a month, but they meet with the grad student or postdoc once or twice a week and get a lot of mentorship experience too. And we recommend things like different books and different websites and articles to read all the time to people based on people's interests.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I honestly haven't heard of that happen a lot in other labs. Like this, like the idea of reading books and just the idea of this holistic development, because you're not just like reading research articles or doing literature review or conducting a study, but you're also focusing on your personality. So as you mentioned, leadership skills, getting more creative. Sounds
Yes.
fantastic. I feel like you're getting honed in this lab to be a better person, a more critical thinker. Sounds amazing, really.
Thank you. Yeah, that is what we strive for. So my main focal area in my dissertation topic was on purpose in life and how it might influence our cardiovascular outcomes. So
Hmm.
I thought a lot about the topic of purpose in life, and in our lab, I do want to help all of our lab members find that spark that kind of helps them, yeah, live out life in a meaningful and purposeful way, and that's part of the reason why we do all these things. So yeah, I guess.
Well, you mentioned about finding the spark. How and actually when did you know that this is like the being a researcher is something that you want to do for the rest of your life?
Yeah. So I remember uh, coming out of high school, my parents, being Asian parents, had a very, they're like, you have so many choices, and then here are your 3 choices, actually. And becoming a researcher or a psychologist was actually not one of them. Yeah, he was like the quote unquote stereotypical ones, like doctor, engineer, lawyer, or something.
Of course, of
And
course.
yeah. So I told my parents I'll give it my best shot in one of them, and then I'll do an internship, like a meaningful internship, and give it a real try. And I did that. I was my first year I was a business major, and then I got this internship on Wall Street, and I was like, oh man, this is totally not for me. I mean, this is, like the things that we do every day, and the overarching goal of these organizations does not fit with me. So I during my first year, I had also applied to a psych lab, and that's when I felt like this is really cool, and that's the things that I look forward to. So after that internship experience, I actually switched over formally to psychology, and I was like, I did my duty, parents. I gave it my best shot, but this is something that I really enjoy. So starting sophomore year, I applied to multiple psych labs too, like 3, to see what type of psychology I was most interested in. And for me, I really don't know. I'm really bad at like predicting. There's a whole literature on this affective forecasting and how we're not so great at predicting what we might like. So I would encourage people to try things. Yeah.
That's just my life. I have not been good
Yes.
at predicting, and my idea has also been about experimenting. I think throughout my undergrad, I've learned more about what I like by doing things that I didn't like.
Yeah. Yep. Yes. Exactly. Totally.
I mean, I can still imagine myself still being good at business with the Wall Street internship and everything. And then, to be able to, like, whatever you were doing, you were obviously really good at it, but you just realized that you could also enjoy what you were studying. And that is where I guess psychology came in.
Oh yeah, yes, yep. So yeah, the business. I was like, I need to get out of this as quickly as possible. So I tried really hard, and then that's why. And then, yeah, yep. What I really enjoyed doing was, yeah, thinking of new ideas and how to apply those ideas to improve the human condition. And that is like the core of what gets me up in in the day. And then becoming a researcher has many other benefits too. Like you're
Mhm.
constantly surrounded by awesome thinkers. Like yeah, and
Mm.
when you're in a faculty meeting, oh my gosh, people are writing the textbooks and the articles, and you get to talk to them and ask them questions directly. And we're surrounded by some of the most like invigorating, creative thinkers by all our trainees and students. And there's also this awesome autonomy too, where if I was in a company or another position, my boss would, depending on the company, my boss would be dictating what I'm doing on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And of course, we have to do some things, but we can, if I see a need after talking with people, or if I see a documentary or something, I can just the next day like try to start working on a project in that direction and write grants and research. So that's an incredible level of autonomy that you get in this field of research.
Yeah, and now when I think of it, I don't think I'd ever thought about that aspect of it, this autonomy that you mentioned, and just like waking up one day and deciding to focus on whatever you're interested in. It's like the sky is your limit in terms of what you want to do research and how you want to help people.
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
Great.
Yeah.
So you then did your degree in clinical psychology from
I did.
Harvard as well as your postdoc experience was in Harvard too, and Harvard is like wow, like the like how what made you then pick, like you said that you did three, you went, I think, I mean you sorry, you had your
Yeah.
experience working in three different labs, and like you were figuring out which kind of psychology you wanted to focus on. How did you decide that clinical is the stream for you?
Yeah. Yes. So um, yeah, I'll tell you about my educational journey too. So my freshman year lab that I joined, that I ended up liking that one the most, even after trying out other labs too. And it was a lab. His name was Chris Peterson, and he studied different dimensions of psychological well-being. And I was just
Mm.
captivated by this field. And back then, it was not as wide as it is now. The vast majority of labs were still studying psychological distress, and that's extremely important. But I was just fascinated by the good life too, and how we can help cultivate and build that. So it was interesting. I just wanted to stay in that lab because I
Mhm.
really liked my advisor and the kind of research that they're doing, and he happened to be in the clinical psych department. So I was like, oh man. Of course, I applied to other places too, but I was like, I really want to stay in this lab. So that's actually kind of how it worked. And yeah, also that there is that desire to help people, and clinical is a very direct way of helping people because you get to see patients too. And yeah, when I actually got into the clinical program, so I stayed at Michigan for my PhD with that same lab. And during that time, when I was working with patients, there were multiple realizations. First, I think the work that people in clinical do is tremendous, and it's also very difficult too. Because have you read the book the Giver kind of? Um, yeah, it's okay. It's for me personally, I was not good at compartmentalizing people's
Mm.
like hurts that they were telling me. So I would keep thinking about it too, and I think that's a skill that we have to develop. But I wasn't good at developing it because I just keep thinking about the people too. So
Mm.
that reason, and another reason was what the work that we're doing is fantastic, but how can we scale it? So that was something that I really thought a lot about, and that's the reason why I actually went and did a postdoc in a school of public health, because public health is all about scaling interventions to millions of people.
Yeah.
And yeah, I did my postdoc. I went to the Harvard School of Public Health to do that, and that I did learn a lot about how to scale interventions, and um, because of that too, uh, and stepping back, during my early years, I was really interested in older adults because of my grandfather and health outcomes
Mhm.
too. So basically, I realized in retrospect, a health psychologist my entire time because I was focusing on health outcomes, but my area was really open to us, yeah, exploring these kinds of ideas. So that's part of my educational journey. So there's many more parts of that, but I think those are the really core parts and kind of the decision points of why I went and shifted. I did, yeah, when I did.
It is so inspiring. Could you tell us a little bit more about like the difference between a postdoc experience and a PhD? I feel like I've mostly heard PhD and masters, but I've rarely heard of postdoc, and I'm just very intrigued by what does that look like.
Yes, yep. So a postdoc experience, it's usually building additional experiences, and
Mm.
people can either build upon their strengths already that they already have, or try to build in an area that they really don't know much about. So I didn't fully realize this, but when I did a postdoc in public health, I felt like I was starting grad school over again because I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know the major theories or the major researchers or the paradigms and the methods. And at first it was overwhelming, and I'm like, did I make the right decision? But a few months into it, I'm like, this is awesome because there are so many interesting synergies with psychology, and then there are also so many things that people can learn by learning two different fields because you can kind of arbitrage some of the ideas, um, yeah,
Oh,
across the different fields too. So postdoc is great because you have all the skill sets already, and then you can just kind of go and sprint and do things because a lot of the PhD years are also learning about the skills and the norms in the field. And towards the end of a PhD program, I felt this, but during my postdoc, I was like, oh, I can do this all the time. And some researchers say that postdoc is their favorite time of life because they can, yeah, they have no other duties except to do research and learn and things like that. So it's a
wow.
fun. Yes.
So, what makes one come back for a PhD then? Is it more about, like, again, further strengthening your research skills?
Oh, can you rephrase that question?
Yeah, so I was just curious, and if a PhD happens after the postdoc,
Ah.
that is the order, right?
Oh, sorry. No, sorry, I wasn't clear. So the order is PhD and then postdoc is after. It
Oh, okay.
postdoc is an abbreviation for postdoctoral fellow. So like
Ah, okay.
post after the doctoral. Yeah, no, this is totally all good because I didn't know this either, and I only learned about it like in grad school.
Wow, that just in my head, it just comes across as so many years of education. How do you keep yourself motivated to like keep studying?
Yeah, yep. There's it's many factors, and you're right. It is a lot of years of education. Um, at a fundamental level, I really deeply enjoy the things that I do in the daily activities. So yeah, professors do work long hours, but a lot of us also think of many of our activities as not work actually. So some people might, for example, enjoy getting a drink after work and talking with their friends, right, about all kinds of things. But a lot of the time when I'm talking with professors about ideas, like I get that same level of invigoration as
Mhm.
well. So like that time, I don't even think of it as work time usually. And then some people might enjoy working on puzzles or playing chess or something like that. And when I'm learning statistics and deploying statistics, that kind of me is like that. I'm like, it's hard learning statistics. When I after I learn it, I get to use it. I feel like I'm in the zone, and like it's like problem solving a lot of the time too. So it doesn't feel like work to me. And some of the activities do feel like work, but many of them don't. That's why even though like if someone from another field were to look at us, be like, oh my gosh, you guys go through so much education, so many years of education, and your work hours are longer. It is objectively true from another point of view and another lens. But I think for many researchers, we see it a different way.
Yeah, and it's so evident to me that you clearly enjoy the work that you do and it keeps you going.
Oh, thank you.
And I think that's
Yeah.
so important, like as undergrads, I feel like that needs to be really stressed that you need to find that fit that makes you enjoy and look forward to your work every day. So that, as you said, I hope for me when I'm like whatever I end up pursuing, I enjoy it so much that it doesn't feel like work.
Exactly. Yes. Yep. And along those lines, when people ask these kinds of questions, I recommend a book called So Good They Can't Ignore You, and the author is Cal Newport. He's also an academic. He's a computer scientist at Georgetown, and I love all of his books. But here, a main thesis and idea is that in order, everyone wants these kinds of jobs where you get autonomy, you get like comfortable pay, you can contribute to the world, and everyone wants these kinds of things. Or not, like most of these people wants these kinds of things, but society is structured so that only so many of these positions exist. Therefore, we have to develop
Mm.
rare and valuable skills, and and once we get those rare and valuable skills, we can kind of quote unquote like trade it in for these kinds of occupations. And that's why we have to, work for many years developing those rare and valuable skills in order to get these kinds of positions. Therefore, that I think helps give a more 360 view of why it might be worth it to do this much education. And if people read that book and agree with the philosophy, then it doesn't even have to be a PhD in psychology. It can be a totally different track, but it usually takes a long time to develop these very valuable skills.
Definitely, and I thank you so much for recommending that. That's one of the first things I feel like I'd want to do
Yeah.
after I'm done with the midterms. Like exams are ending, the term's ending in a month. So after that, that's the first thing that I'm gonna do. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Now, Dr. Kim, when I was exploring your website, I came across this very exciting news that you're going to be the keynote speaker at the 7th International Positive Psychology Association World Congress taking place in July. And that sounds
Mhm.
amazing. I've seen so much buzz around positive psychology, but
Mhm.
I would love to know from you, what does it really mean to you?
Sure. Yes. Yep. And just to clarify, I'm one of other keynotes too. I'm not the keynote. And then yeah. And another note too is that there's a really great cluster of people who study these kinds of psychological well-being factors, including Liz Dunn and Nancy Sin here. So they're really great minds to also look at. And yeah, to me, um, if if we look at the history of psychology, the vast majority of it has been focused on what can go wrong with humans. So factors like depression, anxiety, PTSD, phobias, and all kinds of these things.
Mhm.
And it's extremely important, and the field has done a fantastic job characterizing, understanding, and intervening on these factors. But um, although there have been a few individuals throughout the history of psychology looking at these factors, there's not been many at all looking at what constitutes the good life. So
Yeah.
yeah, factors like purpose in life, hope, positive emotions. And it's interesting because a lot of the field for a lot of the time thought these kinds of things were just kind of useless a lot of the time and just side effects or outliers. But this is also a very important part of the human condition if we think about ourselves in a holistic way. So
Mhm.
people, again, throughout history, there have been some who have been studying it, but more collectively, there's been a group of researchers in the last 20, 30-ish years who have been studying it very systematically and in larger numbers of teams. And that kind of is the psychological well-being movement. So positive psychology movement is kind of like one movement within it, but there have been others too as well. Yeah, so that's that's what I think it is in a nutshell, and putting it and situating it in the context of the history of psychology.
Thank you so much for telling us about that. Like, as you said, I think of late, I have been seeing more courses about positive psychology coming up on platforms like Coursera. I think Yale University does a lot of research on this topic. And I've always been interested in knowing more. But as you mentioned, I think there's just not enough talk about it as much as like people look at, more conditions that are on the other end of the spectrum. Basically, as you're saying, you're always looking at what's sort of going wrong in life rather than like well-being.
Exactly. Yep. So yeah, there's a great course here taught by Dr. Liz Dunn on this topic too. And if I was an undergrad, I would be ecstatic to take that course and learn from her because I've been reading her stuff for so long. And undergrads actually have a voice too. So you should, if you want more of these kinds of courses, you can kind of like ask for it for all kinds of people. And if there's enough voice, then the department can offer more kinds of courses too at more advanced levels and focusing in on different things. So for example, I would love to teach a course on how different dimensions of psychological well-being influence our health behaviors and health outcomes. And yeah, but um, I'm so new here that I'm still situating and learning about the area. But if there's enough demand and the department hears it, they can create courses like that.
Well, I think to our listeners, I hope that, like you've heard what Dr. Kim is saying, we need to talk more about courses like this, that we get to listen to him for longer and regularly, because it's been so nice talking to you, Dr. Kim. And, this conversation, like these are the conversations that I personally enjoy so much, because you get to learn so much from people like you who clearly love doing what they do and supporting other individuals find what they love doing. As you mentioned, your lab is all about finding a purpose. Like that is very central to what you do, making sure your lab members find their spark in whatever project they are working on. So it's also amazing. Thank you so much for taking out the time today to tell us about this. It's been
Thank
such
you,
a
and
pleasure talking to you.
yes, it's been such a pleasure, and thank you for staying up until 12:30. And also, this series is a fantastic idea because you're right. It is a maze. There's so many different labs, and it's so hard to understand exactly what they're doing and what they're about and their philosophy. So this really helps open that curtain and help people know in a deeper way. So thank you so much.
Of course, especially when they're labs that are like that new like yours, but they're still doing such incredible work that we're so glad to be able to like offer this platform for students to just know more about this, so they can, at least so they don't miss out on opportunities
Yes,
like
yes,
these. Thank you
agreed.
so much.
Thank you.